Hello, welcome back to Far Horizons Gaming. My name is Ben, and today we're continuing on with Suzerain. So, last time we left off, we had a discussion with our cabinet about what we wanted to do with the constitutional reforms, and that was followed up by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court coming into our office and kind of sort of threatening us. So the incredibly conservative Supreme Court does not want any of these reforms to go through. They're trying to convince us that one of our allies in Parliament is basically some sort of domestic agent working against the country, so we shouldn't trust him. And they're threatening to make sure that nothing we did could possibly go through the Supreme Court. Which, I mean, honestly, is pretty much exactly why we're trying to reform the Constitution, so the Supreme Court doesn't have any, political jurisdiction there. That's not the right word, but that's okay. We'll go with it. So, let's go ahead and move on to the next turn here. Trials of Democracy. Ooh, alright. 5 news articles. Looks like we've got a bunch of reports. So, yeah. Alright, we'll go ahead and start off with the news articles here. Apparently, I can't read any of the old ones. That's interesting. Alright, so we're going to start off with Swordland today, with school poisoning in Ribble. Wow, okay. Police have arrested the principal of a high school in Narbell, in southern Bergia, where 12 students died after eating a free meal laced with pesticide. Good lord. The students, aged between 15 and 17, died after eating a lunch of local dish of zabla, cooked at the school in a poverty-stricken city. Police have started the investigation to solve the mystery of how the pesticide ended up in the food. Okay, that's not an article I was expecting. That's kind of messed up. Alright, the Radical, the communist paper here. Time for women to stand up. The women in Swordland have always been under pressure by the unequal society and system of discrimination that was built by old men who only knew about war, said Katarina Horton in a women's rally that was held in Holzord yesterday. Swordish League of Women is organizing a number of rallies across Swordland to bring the change Swordland desperately needs. It is time for Swordland to realize that we have to respect every individual regardless of their sex and strive to become an advanced civilization. Women have long been pushed to the corners of the social and political life. To address this change, a new campaign has started all over Swordland to establish a framework for women's rights. Swordish League of Women is organizing rallies with support from Minister of Education Ciara Walda, member of the Assembly Katarina Horton. Everybody is equal according to the Swordish Constitution, but there are no protections against discrimination which only reinforces inequality in practice, said Walda in a press conference. This movement must be supported by all Swordish women as well as men. We need to bring change now. We can do it. So that's interesting. So this game technically takes place in the 50s. Should be... well, it's a little bit earlier than kind of the feminist movement in the United States. I mean, I realize this is a totally fake country and everything, but... so it's kind of interesting, just kind of comparing timelines there. Alright, next one. Questioning Solist Education. The newly unveiled SIPA Education Performance Report unveiled a sad reality about Swordland's abysmal status in comparison to many countries. Swordland was rated 39th out of the 68 nations that are assessed by the OMAC organization. The primary gauge of the quality of education is made from a sample of 16-year-olds from each nation and their capacity in fields like mathematics, history, chemistry, and many others. One of the key issues was seen as a strong focus on history and citizenship classes, leaving little time for scientific fields. Minister Walda often mentioned the gaps in the system in her assembly debates before she joined the cabinet. This is also supported by one of our editors, a professor from Holzord State, who had long been critical of the situation in secondary education. The SIPA report reveals the damning truth that Solist education, based on the principles of statism, nationalism, republicanism, poisons the bright minds of our children. We need to rid the system from the poison that is ideological indoctrination and let our future generations think for themselves. That's a pretty damn solid point. Alright, economists. Upcoming government budget changes. As the top economy experts in the country, we've been watching the upcoming changes to the government budget very closely. President Anton Rein's first internal economic challenge lies ahead, and we'll see if he can prove his capabilities as a leader who can think ahead. The potential ramifications of diverting the funding to certain governmental branches have always been a point of contention for any leader, and it is no different for this case. We'll see if President Rein can hold on to the promises he has given during the election campaign. And geopolitical, Van Horten blames Vogsland for the missing fishing vessel. On Tuesday morning, Agnolia's Prime Minister Van Horten has made a statement denouncing Vogsland for the missing vessel, hull number ARV-0238. Our dutiful Coast Guards have rescued a crew member of the missing vessel. Through his statement, we have learned the ship's unfortunate end was none other than the Vogslandian Navy. However, the Prime Minister has refused to disclose the surviving crew member due to fear of an assassination attempt from Vogsland to cover up their hostility, as the minister later claimed. Interesting. So we got more potential wars on the borders here. Cool. Alright. Well, let's check out some of these reports. So from Boren, communist books burned in Boren. Local residents gathered thousands of books that they claimed to be spreading communist and millennialist propaganda at the Century Park in Boren and set the books on fire. Aggressive slogans targeting the Red Youth, the Workers' Party of Bludia, and the Communist Party of Swordland were shouted. Youth groups from the local party offices of the USP and NFP also joined in with the burning. The fire department was dispatched and the protesters dispersed on their own. Interesting. Never really understood book burnings myself, but that's okay. If nothing else, if you're buying all this stuff to burn it, you're giving the people you're protesting against a whole bunch of money. It just seems like a stupid idea to me. Yep, and here we go. Here's another one. Except the burning flags this time. Young Swords and NFP flags burned. Massive counter-protests against Young Swords led by a local politician known to be aligned with the Red Youth resulted in many injuries and property damage. Subsequently, Young Swords and National Front Party flags were burnt, which caused tensions to escalate. Local police dispersed the protesters by sundown. Cool, so more violent protests here between, looks like, the communists and the fascists. That's lovely. Alright. About Sarna. Blutish resistance in sanctuaries. Security units have arrested 3 priests at 2 different nerdy sanctuaries in Sarna after finding links to insurgent activities. The report came from an elderly man who wanted to pray in peace, but instead found himself invited to join the Blutish Freedom Front by a state-sanctioned priest. Further incidents indicate that the BFF is pushing for a local recruitment drive in different sanctuaries across the region. And that right there is why we have separation of church and state. Alright. And moving across the map here to Narbell. Narbell reports lack of hospitals. The mayor of Narbell has reported that their hospitals are overburdened and they are unable to respond to the needs of the citizens. He complained about months-long waiting lists for terminally ill patients. On top of the capacity issues, it's also noted that the facilities are still largely using outdated technology. That's definitely some bad infrastructure problems. It'd be nice if we could address that, but I have a feeling we've got a lot more things higher on our list, though. Alright, the final report is from Lockhaven. Recession hits farmers again. As per the latest news from Lockhaven, the farming industry has taken another hit as a result of the recession. There are reports that 16% of all wheat in Lockhaven is rotting in barns due to a lack of buyers. Farmers are requesting additional funds from the government to survive the year. That's not cool. Alright, well. Nice, okay, we've got all these nice sad reports, and we're going to a barbecue with our family. That's alright, it's a good change of pace. Alright, it was a Saturday afternoon, my first break from work in what felt like years, and the weather couldn't have been more perfect. Trying to keep my mind off the upheaval sparked by the circus assassination, I lit the backyard grill. Monica and Deanna were out shopping for craft supplies, and I'd given the staff the day off. It was just myself and Frank at home. I wasn't sure how he felt about me at that moment, but I did know how he felt about barbecued ribs. Our cook had left some marinating in the refrigerator. Sure enough, as soon as Frank glimpsed the grill and the meat, he stepped outside to join me. Come to spend some quality time with your old man, have you? Sure. You can spare a few minutes out of your busy schedule. Yeah, let's go to this bottom one. I'm sorry, I know I haven't been around very often lately, but I'm happy to see you now. It's okay. I know you've got the most stressful job in the country, and you've got to feed your family on top of it all. We both chuckled. I turned to tend to the fire. Here, let me try. Grabbed the fan and started quickly waving it over the coals. The fire roared to life. He turned to look at me with a grin on his face, as if he was expecting praise. Not bad, son. Not bad. Thank you, sir. It's in our utmost interest to fulfill our duties with precision. The grilling shall commence in exactly 1 minute 32 seconds. Oh, whoops. That's supposed to be, Lucian. That's fine. That was a spot-on impersonation of Lucian. We looked at each other for a second and then burst out laughing. Whatever. I realized my throat was parched. There's a 6-pack of beer in the kitchen. Hey, why don't you grab us a couple beers? He looked at me in disbelief. You mean I can... But Mom told me... He stopped himself, quickly ran inside and returned with 2 beers. We cracked them open, clinked the bottles, and gazed out at the city skyline. For a moment, my thoughts flashed back to my childhood, my relationship with my own father. My father was a hard-working man and always had our best interests in mind, or at least that's what he always said. But he had a temper and would lash out at my mother in fights I could hear from my bedroom. By the time I was Frank's age, we seldom spoke. Now that I was the president, I was facing more stress than my father ever had. I'd have to work hard not to take my frustrations out on my family. Dad, can I ask you something? Yeah, we're family. You can ask anything. It's just, I feel like there's so much you've been hiding from me, about your past and about what's going on right now. Like at dinner that night after the ball, you told me everything was under control, but it wasn't, was it? I know what happened in the 20s. We learned all about it in school. Now, with the protests and the riots, is it going to be the same thing? Dad, is there going to be civil war in Swordland? I hope not. He let out a sigh. But what was it like back then? Uncle Peter said the 2 of you went through a lot. I'm not a kid anymore, you can tell me. Before I could gather my thoughts, the familiar images started flashing before my eyes. Images of soldiers advancing towards me and my friends, weapons drawn, of people I knew, friends, neighbors, being dragged through the streets and murdered in alleyways. And that little girl's face. Those were dark times. It seems like it. But you're nearly a grown man, so let's talk about it. Frank leaned forward in his chair, his eyes wide. It's time to tell him about the coup of 1927. I was barely older than you are now, studying law at the Whole Sword State University. I was a freshman, excited and young. I had just left the classroom to go back home as I heard the sound of multiple vehicles approaching the campus gates. As I got closer, I realized there were military camouflage trucks and tanks, carrying hundreds of soldiers. The same soldiers that were supposed to protect Swordland citizens pointed their guns at us. They immediately took control of the facilities. One of my friends asked what was going on and was arrested immediately. More people got angry and gathered in protest. Frank kept listening, a shocked look on his face. I was there with the protesters as they declared martial law. We marched towards them. They threatened to use force, but we stood our ground. So they started beating anyone they saw, including me. The physical wounds took a few weeks to heal. The mental scars have stayed with me to this day. I was still one of the lucky ones. Some of my friends were shot, many more were arrested. I can't forget the screams to this day. Frank leaned back in his chair. His shoulders slumped heavily. It was time to tell him about the Civil War. It was right after I met your mother. We had both joined the same human rights group to push for change after the coup of 27. Eventually, I became convinced I wasn't doing enough, so I joined the Red Youth. Then, one night, it happened. 2 different factions in the army, one of them led by Fascist General Ludrin and the other by Socialist General Riekerd, started fighting against each other. It was a bloodbath. Nowhere was safe. Frank shifted in his seat, visibly uncomfortable. So we organized a protest one day in support of Riekerd. In our minds, he was the better of the two and a true socialist. I paused for a moment before continuing. It was horrible. They were waiting for us. Soldiers started beating and shooting at everyone and plowing their tanks through the crowd. Amid the chaos, there was this girl. I had never forgot her face. I had tried to save her, but I couldn't reach her in time. Frank's face had grown pale. He turned his eyes away from me. I think that's probably enough for today. Oh, it's okay. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have asked you about it. I know I don't understand how easy my life is sometimes. One more thing, though. I know that you joined the Red Youth back then. Do you mind if I ask why? I had to survive somehow in that environment, and I made a choice. Frank raised his eyebrows, his curiosity still not satisfied, but sensing my reluctance to go on, he simply nodded. Sorry for bombarding you with questions. I know I complain sometimes, but my problems are nothing compared to what you went through. Yeah, that's goes a nice boomer answer there. Now, I'm here to listen to them, no matter what they are. Before Frank could say anything else, I heard the front door unlock. Deanna and Monica's voices and the sounds of rustling shopping bags filled the house. Alright, I'll be upstairs until dinner. Frank went in and dashed upstairs. I took a long sip from my beer, looking at the city and the now setting sun. I hoped that talking to Frank about my past had been the right decision. Part of me felt as if some burden had been lifted. But I had the same nightmares again that night. Damn, okay. I was expecting like a nice, happy little dinner with our family. That got dark kind of quick there. Nice. Alright. Damn, we got a ton of briefings here again. Let's pop back to the newspaper. With the Whole Sword Post. And wow, there you go. Right back with the darkness here. Attacker opened fire on protesters. 17 dead. A man opened fire in Vezord City Center during a protest march organized by the Communist Party of Swordland against the murdered Bernard Circus. The attacker used a military-grade machine gun dated 1929, which is suspected to be part of the inventory of the Swordlish Armed Forces. The attacker killed himself right after shooting 25 people, killing 16. He took out the weapon from the newsstand at the square, brandished it and yelled, "Come, I will give you freedom," one witness said. The highly charged word freedom was previously associated with brutish separatists. I don't know why that's hard to say. But has been used widely during the previous month of protests against the murder of Bernard Circus. Minister of the Interior, Lilias Graf, said that she had spoken to the chief of Vezord Police and asked him to take strict action. The government will not tolerate any such incident, and the perpetrators will not be spared, she said. Okay. Lockhaven Times. And some sports postponed here due to the violence. Gelsword FC, Anarcha FC Derby postponed due to protests. One of the most anticipated matches between Gelsword and Anarcha was postponed because of the intense protests in the city of Anarcha. The league has issued the following statement regarding the situation. Due to safety reasons, the players are compromised during this time of trouble. We have decided to postpone the game. Moreover, we stand in solidarity with the fans, our players, and the people of Anarcha in the fight against injustice. Mayor Curtin Lest has also made a statement. It is a tragic day of Swordland where the president himself refused to act in the face of communism. He said that inaction breeds doubt and fear. Thus, I fear that the spread of communism has sown deeper inside the heart of the nation than we thought. However, I and the people of Anarcha will never stop fighting for the soul of our great country. Okay. Not quite sure what that dig at me was supposed to be about, but whatever, I guess. So the Lockhaven Times is bitching that the communists are like too strong, but the communists are bitching that they don't have enough power over here, it looks like. Okay. Alright, well, the communist paper here, the Radical, says undemocratic elections of Swordland. Swordland has an electoral threshold of 10%. This means any political parties that are under 10% of the vote can't even enter the assembly. This is the very reason why the United Swordland Party holds 52% of seats in the assembly today. It's also the reason why the largest ethnic minority of Swordland is non-existent in Swordish politics. The last elections have shown that the pro-Blutish WPB had an enormous voter base of just above 9%. It still failed to meet the 10% threshold and couldn't enter politics. Similarly, the CPS has won around 8% of the general vote, but was eliminated. This means that millions of votes are not represented in our current government. Moreover, this has benefited the USP the most and gave them the lawmaking power. The undemocratic threshold needs to be lowered down so that there is true representation in the Assembly, and a true representation of our voices. No one can call Swordland democracy without a decrease or a constitutional proposal that does not include such... What? It does not include such change democratic. Alright, I'm not sure what that sentence means, but that's okay. Basically, they're wanting to lower the admission thresholds to get into Parliament, which I'm not really going to argue with, but we'll see what happens. Alright, so a report from Morna. Morna Industrial Output Concerns. The mayor of Morna has reported that their industrial output numbers this year are 12% lower than last year. They are requesting additional support to improve their industrial capacity, including machinery and personnel, to combat the downward trend. With the construction of several new factories in Morna, the mayor stated his belief that an economic upturn in the city is still possible if government investments succeed. According to current projections, Morna is set to lose an additional 2% of industrial output next year. However, recent data from the municipality suggests that an investment worth several billions of SR will stop the downward trend and increase the industrial output in a short amount of time. Alright, USP report on reforms from Whole Sword. Many members of the USP, led by Albin Clavin and the reformist wing of the party, clarified their demands from the government in the party congress. For the upcoming constitutional reform, Albin Clavin stated that without ministry reforms, they won't be able to stand behind the new reform package. Okay. So basically they want us to change our package a little bit before they'll support us. Right. Prisoners riot in Antel Rock Prison. Nice. Yesterday, around 11 a.m., a prison riot started in Ward C of the Antel Rock Prison, which was eventually suppressed. Ward C is generally used for keeping political prisoners. Interesting. The riot started when the warden was killed by a Blutish political prisoner. 4 guards and 21 prisoners died. 134 were injured. Wow, okay. I don't know if I like the fact that we have a prison wing specifically for political prisoners. That just seems like, imprisoning people for thought crimes, which is not cool. Alright. Well, let's continue on with the story here then. The presidential visit to Narbell. I was traveling to the snow-covered city of Narbell in the Nargis region for the Rural Development Forum, organized by the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Education. The mountainous city of Narbell had gritty tones to it. It's mostly regarded as one of the poorer cities in Swordland. Its people were hardy and wary. Even after the discovery of natural resources in the area, years of neglect by the central government were apparent on the buildings and the general infrastructure. Natural resources, namely gas and oil, were now under the control of Gasom, which elevated the corporation to a place of power. My task in this forum was mainly symbolic: fake smiles and handshakes with oil barons, meeting with local politicians, but most importantly of all, to make sure that Narbell does not feel like it is forgotten by the government. The scenery so far, however, was a reflection of Narbell's neglect. Main roads to the city were not maintained well. There were many bumps and empty, discolored spots in the asphalt. Navigating and swerving to avoid the inconveniences, our motorcade finally started nearing the city. As if my discomfort from the bumpy ride was apparent to him, Serge rolled down the partition window. We'll be arriving at the Hotel West in a few minutes, sir. Thank you for letting me know. Any time. It is my duty. After a moment, Serge started to smile under his mustache. What's it smile for? Sir, I just want to say it has been great these last 2 months. As you know, my wife Susan recently gave birth to her son, sir. Now my daughter just started at a very good high school in Holzard. That's great news, Serge. I'm happy for you. I appreciate it, sir. Truly. I was worried that I wouldn't be able to afford a good private school if she scored less in the entrance exams. But I shouldn't have made my insecurity get to me. Erica outsmarts me all the time. I'm proud to have a daughter like her. Yeah, I too hope that Gianna will grow to be like her mother someday. I'm sure she will, sir. After all, she is the daughter of a lion and a lioness. My daughter looks up to the First Lady for inspiration, and it's not just limited to my daughter, sir. She is inspiration for almost all women in the country. But at the same time, it must be hard for the First Lady as well. All this attention, adjusting to this new high-profile life, and a husband that has great responsibility. You're right, it is hard for her. It must be, sir. We sometimes forget the important people in life between all the responsibility and rush. You know, those we care for. I agree. Serge continued after a moment of silence. Have I told you, sir? We named my son George. The doctor said he is very healthy, and thankfully so is my wife. Tell me more about Susan. What kind of person is she? Hey, this guy's our driver. We're with him a lot. It doesn't pay to be a dick to your help. Anyway, she has a good heart. Her family comes from Sarna, so they are a little more traditional. I really like her selflessness. Selflessness is a respectable trait to have. It should be mutual. That is what matters most. Serge sighed. I already started thinking about their university education, especially Erica. I want to send her to a good private school, but with the current state of the economy, it's going to be hard for us. Alright, this is a tough one. On one hand, I wouldn't mind trying to be really nice and paying for, his kid's education. But it's -1 personal wealth. That's all I have is 1. And although that's certainly a really good selfless act, I don't know if that's the best choice to take at the moment. So, we'll go with option 2 here. We'll fix the economy, one way or another. If anyone can, that's you, Mr. President. The car hit a major pothole and a bump, which lifted us up in our seats for a second. God, this is unacceptable. We need to invest in infrastructure here. I agree, sir. We still need to drive back tomorrow, unless you use one of those new helicopters. The motorcade began approaching the hotel. The Hotel West was supposedly the best hotel in Narbell. The large 25-story main building was undoubtedly one of the taller, more expensive buildings in the city. It towered over the nearby slums and had been a target for protests when it was first built. A crowd was gathered in front of the hotel with the welcoming committee at its center. So we approached the red carpeted entrance. I could see the mayor of Narbell and his top aides. Serge got out of the car and opened the door. He bowed his head respectfully and gestured towards the entrance. Thank you. Have a good day, Mr. President. As soon as I left the vehicle, the fresh air of Narbell filled my lungs. Almost immediately, everyone present in the crowd flocked over to me with an excessive display of courtesy. Smiles, and handshakes, while I donned the mask of a politician. Mask that I was very used to. Okay, we didn't even actually get to the meeting, and already got a bunch of things again. Alright. Well, I guess let's go back to reading the newspapers. Alright, the Whole Sword Post. Protests appear calmer. As protests continue nationwide, tension eases in some cities. Still, several major cities, including Dyer and Lockhaven, did have some scattered reports of violence on Monday night. Tens of thousands in Deer, Cirx's hometown, walked in memorial march, though police moved in on the thinning crowd as evening settled, making arrests. Authorities said demonstrators began throwing rocks and ignored orders to disperse. Protests in Holzord and most other major cities appeared calmer, with fewer clashes between civilians and police. Authorities have made at least 9,800 arrests related to the protests, according to tally from the state press. That's a lot of arrests. Alright, back to the Radical. Shocking misogynist rally. Every day we are appalled by how deep the roots of misogyny goes in our country. We are appalled again when yesterday, during a protest by the Swordlish League of Women, counter-protesters showed up to disrupt the peaceful rally. In the resulting scuffle between the police, the protesters, and the mob, many were arrested from both sides. Road to change is filled with real obstacles, but we said it before, we can do it. Okay. Soul needs to answer for his crimes. Looking at the history of everything wrong in our country, there's only one figure that everyone points at, Tarkin Soul. He has devolved our country into something much worse than what it was before. He's committed crimes against humanity. We all still remember the Islam incident and the wounds that have been inflicted on hundreds of thousands of people with Bluish ethnic background. We've been calling for his trial, and we believe it is time that this government opens the way for a fair trial by removing the undemocratic and absurd laws that protect him. It is time that the Constitution of 1929 that protects Soul be changed. People are still waiting for a fair trial, for justice to be served, and for their questions to be answered. And Labor Union Rights March. A large group of labor union members gathered around the city of Volgan to protest against the poor condition of worker rights in Swordland. People could be seen holding signs pleading for accountability and basic rights in corporate work environments. Dozens of tourist workers were in the middle of the crowd. One worker was heard saying, "I know the law gives us nothing on paper. Is this the reality we choose to accept?" Others pointed out that the country is relying on the workers to stop the recession but doesn't give them anything back. Look at how great the rights are in Volgan: minimum wage, overtime pay, and safe working regulations. The time for real workers' reform is now, one voice demanded with frustration. We had the opportunity to interview some open-minded managers from corporations. They relayed that the companies have little to no oversight. It's hard to disagree that the time for labor reform is long due. Albin Klavan from the reformist wing of the USP has seen the potential and announced that work has begun to explore what can be achieved. President Rain listened to the demands. Time will tell. I'm pretty sure that's one of my campaign promises, but we'll have to see what we can do about that. Alright, economists. Education privatization proven successful. Our editorial team immediately analyzed the SIPA report recently revealed. Recently revealed to assess the standards of education. I just did a weird phrase there. That's okay. We are curious to see how the policies of the last decade have begun changing the performance metrics. Lesbia specifically stood out with a jump of 6 positions forward to 5th out of 68. After a research and analysis collaboration with the Vice President of Magnus Cartas and SMEA chapter leader of OMAC, we gained critical insights to how Lesbia increased its education quality. It boils down to 2 major points. One is the privatization efforts led by Prime Minister Alvarez that led to most schools in wealthier neighborhoods, 1,404 to be precise, to be privatized. This lifted a significant budget burden off the state because the wealthy paid for a great education for their kids and were still taxed reasonably in order to divert funds to state schools elsewhere. The second major factor was the allowance of minor curricular changes for private institutions that led to major improvements in the student participation, teacher happiness, and boosted the performance of the institutions. All in all, the improvements to the system and the massive amounts of 34 billion lira raised for Lesbia made it a lucrative option. Swordland desperately needs more capital to tackle the recession, and when education is privatized, foreign capital will also aid in establishing quality schools. The Vice President of Magnus Carta pointed out that the SIPA report doesn't include access to education metrics, and that Lesbia has inequality problems. A statement that hasn't been proven with any statistical research from OMAC. which is why it must be taken with a pinch of salt. The Reign administration could be practical about this term and looked at the Southern example and had to do positive change, even though opposition from the Minister of Education is expected. I don't think I like that one. Private schools are nice insofar as, obviously, like it says, they have more money. But there's so much less oversight, and they can teach whatever they want. And can, pretty much do whatever they want. With no government oversight, so there's no real equality in the education. On top of, like it said, whatever, somewhere in there. Oh, there you go. Lespe has inequality problems, as well as like access to education metrics. Pretty much means that only the rich kids get a good education, and the poor kids can basically just get bent. Definitely not a fan of that idea. Alright. So, heading over to Vezord, young swords suspected of terror attack. At approximately 1646 on Monday, terror attack occurred in the Vezord city center during a rally by the left-wing CPS. The attacker, suspected to be working with Young Swords or another organization connected to them, opened fire with an automatic rifle on the protesting civilians. 17 people were killed, including the attacker, who shot himself afterwards. Witnesses testified that the rifle was hidden behind a newsstand. Our local police are now wary of this tactic, and all newsstands will be inspected by the police before and during crowded rallies. Further investigations on Young Swords are underway. Oh, okay, this is what that other news report was about. That's just the same thing. Alright, report from Whole Sword, PFJP report on reforms. Franz Richter, leader of the PFJP, recently outlined their demands for the reform package. He declared that without the implementation of term limits and limited decrees, it would be very difficult for him and his party to stand behind the reform package. Well, I'm perfectly fine with him adding in term limits and limited decrees. That's a good way to keep people from attempting to just like create a political dynasty. Alright, so back to Narbell, just continuing on with the story there. I arrived at the meeting room for my talk with Ciara and Pascal. Before beginning, I took a moment to appreciate the view from the balcony. The mountains of Narbell were completely covered with snow. While I was mesmerized by the scenery, Pascal Benewol walked up to me. My Ministry of Health was, ironically, somewhat portly, having gained a few pounds since his breakthrough as a best-selling writer, but his authority on social affairs could not be questioned. Such a spectacular view. Sarah Walda, the Minister of Education, joined us on the balcony, dressed in a sky-blue pantsuit. Preference for trousers over dresses had made her the subject of much palace gossip, but it didn't seem to bother her in the slightest. Some good 50s sexism there.
Spectacular indeed, but if you look at the opposite direction, you will see what souls decades have neglected to the city. Most of the people living in Narbell are workers, farmers, and their wives and children, breaking their backs for close to no pay, all thanks to greedy corporations.
My intention is to help the working class.
I'm glad we see eye to eye on the issue. If you look past the view, you can see the real problems. Real problems like poverty.
Pascal nodded gravely. This was a subject he knew quite a bit about himself. His best-known books were about the plight of Swordland's less fortunate, drawing from his own past growing up in squalor. Well put, Miss Walda. I don't need to tell you about my own experiences with poverty. I'm sure you have similar stories. Am I right, Mr. President? We've all gone through difficult times. True, but some lives are more difficult than others, like ours was and still is for hundreds of thousands in Swordland.
You don't have to have been born poor to sympathize with the plight of the impoverished, much as you don't have to have been born a woman to recognize Swordland's need for parity among the sexes.
Parity among the sexes shouldn't be our first priority. Look at how many high-ranking female politicians our country has.
Appearances can be deceiving, Pascal.
Her voice sounded bitter. Hey, I kind of got it right.
Think about how Lilius Groff got to her current position. I don't necessarily believe the rumors about her own soul, but she never could have risen so high if she didn't parrot his calls. Gloria Tori. Is it an accident that the first female assembly speaker is such a staunch conservative? And then there was Alfonso's habits of promoting women to prominent positions to give Swordland a progressive sheen while accomplishing nothing in reality. While women in places like Narbell are denied any opportunity to advance, the government can use a handful of female politicians from wealthy families, myself included, to pretend their only obstacle to success is their own lack of initiative. Meanwhile, those of us who don't use our clout to help powerful men stay in power are denigrated as angry spinsters. I ask you, Mr. President, does anyone care that your strategist, Mr. Gillard, doesn't have a wife?
I'll agree with her. I agree with you completely. Swordland's women deserve better.
I'm glad to hear that. As I was saying, isn't it about time also to address this country's real issues, rather than bowing to the wishes of the hawks and fearmongers in the establishment, diverting yet more resources to military and law enforcement? Our welfare, healthcare, and education systems have been decaying since the recession. Swordland's poorer communities are losing hope. Hopelessness and a lack of opportunities can drive people to extreme solutions. We're seeing increased crime, domestic violence, and yes, rising inequality between men and women.
Those issues must be tackled from different directions. We need to engage holistically. I'm planning to help by using an increased budget to improve the quality of healthcare.
That would prove useful, but we need to be doing a lot more. Education and similar issues.
There is another subject I want to mention. I have been working on improving the rights of workers in our country and have proposed a draft bill that is currently being reviewed by our party. Mr. Cloven has already backed him and given his support. Swordland has fallen behind most countries on the subject, and it is my responsibility to ensure this is not the case. There's always room for improvement, and it's good to hear that you're pushing for it. Appreciate the kind words, Mr. President. I will not let you down.
It's also a matter of life and death. Every decade we hear of some horrific accident to an employer's disregard for their workers' safety.
So, would you back the bill when it arrives on your desk, Mr. President? To make a decision, I'd need to evaluate the contents in detail first. Understandable. You will receive all the sections in an outline. It's getting a little cold out here. Let's head inside and continue our discussions. We headed back inside. The meeting room was already prepared for state business. Small gifts for each of us had been placed on the table by the municipality. We took our seats. Alright, let's start with your health overview, Pascal. As you wish, Mr. President. Swordland has a free healthcare system except for a few private hospitals operating under it. Most of the populace receives adequate treatment. Health issues primarily appear in rural areas due to a lack of quality services. I am doing my best to ensure that citizens of all ages receive the best health care they can. I also personally want to solve the high infant and maternal mortality problem. Jeez. Apparently this is the 1800s up in here. How many hospital beds are there per 10,000 citizens? There are 10 beds per 10,000 citizens, which is a very good number according to our comparisons with other neighbors. We see a lower number in the countries of Agnolia and Valen, but obviously can't match Lesbia or Volksland.
Agnolia and Valen are hardly countries to take as a standard, but it's good to know we aren't in a huge health crisis yet.
How many doctors and nurses are employed? We have 31,594 doctors and 70,680 nurses working for the Ministry of Health. That's a high number. What I think is...
I don't want to be rude, but out of those numbers, how many are in urban and rural areas?
Good point, Ciara. Pascal? Data shows that per 10,000 people in urban areas there are about 11 doctors, while in rural areas there are only 3.
Treatment time is still too high due to the low number of doctors in rural areas which get barely any proper coverage.
Yeah, those are pretty shit numbers. Alright, what's the life expectancy and mortality rates? Life expectancy is 65 years, and the infant mortality rate is a worrying 85 per 1,000 births. Good lord. While maternal mortality rate is at 90 per 1,000. Holy crap, that is bad. Be assured that we are doing everything we can to save mothers and the newborn.
Those numbers are saddening indeed.
I agree. Geez, we must do everything we can. We are working very hard on improving the quality of the services. Thank you, Pascal. Your in-depth briefing is much appreciated. I'd like to hear about the education system now.
With pleasure. Swordlish education is free, but we have a very outdated system that I want to reform. The other important issue is the lack of access to education in rural areas, especially for young girls. Your administration has the power to solve both problems. My highest priority is to get enough funding to be able to build schools in rural areas while I cleanse our educational system of its nationalistic indoctrination and sexist teachings. Those are both good ideas. How many students and teachers do we have? Currently, there are about 5 million students, 3 million in primary, 1 million secondary, and 1 million in tertiary. There are 155,316 teachers.
Swordland is full of young and bright minds. We should keep striving to make education available for all.
I think there needs to be a change in the way of thought. We should help children to question and educate themselves.
What's the literacy rate of Swordland?
The literacy rate of Swordland is 80%. This is a very good indicator of future growth, but it needs to increase. It's also far lower among girls and boys.
80%'s not half bad. Not good, but... If I remember correctly, the most illiterate areas are Berger and Einland.
That is correct, although Lockhaven skews the statistics for the Nagas region, which also has a vast number of illiterate citizens. This underlines my point about the lack of access to education.
Tell me about the difference between urban and rural education.
Urban areas have 3 times the number of schools per 10,000 people compared to rural areas. Rural areas also suffer from a lack of teachers.
That's not a good ratio. The situation is worse than I expected.
This is one of the most important problems we face, if not the most important. A huge part of the population is forgotten in terms of welfare.
Thank you, Ciara. I can fill in the blanks from here. I believe that's everything. Ciara stood up and moved towards the window. She took a deep breath. What is it, Ciara?
Look at this impoverished city. The streets are full of potholes, the hospital barely functioning, the school half open. This is not just about Seoul or even Alfonso failing. The decay in Swordland's forgotten regions has been going on for many decades, due to structural corruption which is fueled by capitalism.
Well, let's not get in an ideological debate. We need to focus on the issues.
One cannot be separated from the other, Mr. Bain. The issues stem from the ideology.
Sarah sat back down and sighed.
One way or another, we need to transform. Greed and unchecked capitalism will not magically provide for the people.
Well, alright. Tell me more about your plans then, Ciara.
My plans require an increase in the government budget. I aim to solve the problems that we highlighted with the allocated money. By building schools in these less fortunate rural areas and through fundamental changes to the education system, I will unlock the potential of all our children, boys and girls alike.
Well, one of our election mandates was to improve education. We'll deliver on this.
This brings hope to the table, which needs to be followed by action. There is much to be done if we are given the budget. There will be opportunities to implement policies that push education to the next level.
Wouldn't promotion of private education help create additional funds?
Yes, but at what cost? I'm not a supporter of the private sector in education, because at the end of the day, they're focused on profit first.
There's also that. That's definitely a problem. Alright, what are you working towards, Pascal? I personally want to improve the low quality of healthcare in the rural areas. So I created draft plans to increase the salary of doctors and to upgrade the equipment of the hospitals. I can do more with an increased budget. Additionally, a privatization plan to promote private investments in the healthcare system could allocate extra funds. I think quality of healthcare in less fortunate areas matters more. Exactly. It would directly diminish the depressingly high infant and maternal mortality situation. Besides, the push would also have economic benefits. I do hope to create competition and increase the quality of healthcare with the privatization effort. A private healthcare system would increase the price of treatment and make access worse for the average citizen. No shit. The decision not to promote more state control costs people dearly. My expectation from our government is that we understand and focus on the needs of the people. This is a tough choice here. Yeah, let's go with this last one. Minister Walda, I have bailed out people in need instead of businesses. Trust me, my priorities are correct. It has shown your dedication, but there are many years ahead of us. This is just the beginning of the journey. No matter how small a step, it is still progress. I think we covered all the necessary subjects. Thank you for your time. I do hope we won't repeat the same mistakes again and again. Have a good day, Mr. President. The ministers left and I attended other official business in the city. The weather was relatively cold, but it didn't keep a group of USP supporters from coming out to cheer at us on the streets. Just by looking at the citizens' attire, it was easy to understand the current state of Narbell. Some people were wearing clothes a few sizes too large. Some kids didn't even have shoes. Yet there was hope in their eyes. They were excited to see their president in their city. Nice. Okay, so it looks like we're moving back to the capital. So it's the end of that little story arc. So I think that's as good a place as any to call it quits for today. So we'll pick back up here again next time. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you next time.